Plus is simply an effort to blend the interactive strengths and benefits of Discovery Bible studies with brief teaching videos to further equip your pursuit of Jesus through the Word of God. These videos are formatted in such a way that presumes that you've already prayed over, read through, and have discussed the Bible passages either individually or communally using the DBS method. If you have any question regarding Discovery Bible Study or DBS Plus, you can find more information on our app and website. Take care. Blessings. Well, hey guys, welcome to week 1 of our DBS teaching series. This is Jesus. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. And you've prayed over that, you've read over that, you've discussed that using Discovery Bible Study. And I am going to jump straight in. There's not a whole lot of historical, cultural, theological depth here in this story. It's pretty simple and self-explanatory, but similar to most other stories in Scripture that can seem simple and straightforward at first glance or when you're just reading through it, this one too can provide several profound perspectives in regard to our pursuit of Jesus. And so just a couple of those. One perspective is whether storms are physical or metaphorical, they can cause panic. Storms can cause panic in our life. The Sea of Galilee has always historically been known for the nasty storms that come up on it because it's geography. Many of Jesus's disciples had been career fishermen. They were used to these storms on the Sea of Galilee. They had grown up with that, learned how to manage them. Not this one. This one was different. And once they lost control of the situation, once they realized the water was coming in, there was nothing they could do to stop it, they panicked. And when panic sets in, it isn't long before we start to doubt and question and lose perspective over the situation. They see Jesus sleeping on the cushion. They go wake him up. Teacher, do you not even care that we're perishing, that we're dying here? Storms are a part of our life. Again, physical or metaphorical, they are a part of our life. And just as the fishermen had spent most of their life learning to adjust to them, knowing how to navigate them and manage them and deal with them throughout their careers, you and I, once you live long enough, you learn how to navigate most storms that come and go in our life. Doesn't matter degree of intensity or not, we learn how to remain in control of our life, generally speaking. But every now and then those storms come up where we just know we have no control and panic sets in. It could be that devastating phone call or text message that you get. It could be that you realize your marriage is crumbling underneath you. Your kids are going haywire. It could be job or financial instability. It could be a lot of different things. A season of spiritual or emotional numbness, like you're just anxiety ridden and you're depressed, and all of this is paralyzing you into deeper and deeper isolation away from people, which is where you need to be for healing. It could be a storm of physical or emotional pain that's just chronic. It's just always there. You cannot seem to get out of it. And at some point you start to question, God, do you even care if I'm dying? I can't hang on to this much longer. Lord, I can't deal with this much longer. And at best we think maybe he's asleep or ignoring us, but at worst, questioning, does he even exist? Like, he's even there. If you loved me, you wouldn't let me go through this any longer. Sound familiar? Like, Jesus was sleeping in the midst of this storm that had everybody in a panic. It wasn't the storm that woke Jesus up. He was sound asleep. But as soon as his disciples cried out to him, he wakes up. He wakes up. He wasn't sleeping because he was afraid of the storm. He was asleep because there was never a moment that he did not fully believe he had absolute control over that situation. And so when the storms kick up that we lose control in, do we tend to panic to the point of questioning and doubting God's care for us, God's love for us, God's presence? Jesus wakes up, doesn't even address the guys, simply says, "Peace, be still," to the storm. and like a light switch. Everything. Sea is like glass. No wind, no waves, no ripples. What? How did that happen? Well, the waves and the wind and the sea recognize the voice of the one who spoke them into existence. And so when he says to be calm, they're calm. Incredible scene on the Sea of Galilee in the midst of this storm. Second perspective is that storms can reveal the measure of our faith to begin with. Like it's easy to get to the point of doubting and questioning in the midst, but does God even care when God is actually showing more care by allowing the storms to come into our life, right? That's so countercultural or counterintuitive, but Jesus is like, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? I mean, these guys have seen Jesus do incredible things, and here in this moment, the storm did not change anything in their faith. The storm did not cause their faithlessness. The storm simply revealed the faithlessness that they had already had in them, but was not exposed when life was good, when they were seeing Jesus do all these other things to all these other people. There's a terminology that someone wrote about, and they termed it storms of grace, where we can begin to have the perspective that the storms that we encounter in life could actually be the storms of grace that God is showing us, because without them, we would not have that aha moment that, wait a minute, maybe I don't trust in Jesus. Maybe I never fully have trusted in Jesus. And as long as life is comfortable and as long as we're doing everything we can in our control to avoid storms, we may never really come to the reality that, do I even believe in and trust in God's love for me through his son, Jesus? And then when we do go through the storms, the natural tendency is just to figure out the fastest way through them, right? Want them to be done, get out of them, don't want to deal with them. But maybe the real fight isn't to get out of the storm. Maybe the real fight is not to lose faith in the midst of it. Maybe the real fight is to double down on our faith that God is in control of all things, no matter how long this storm is or how intense it may be. But by allowing his disciples to go through this life-threatening storm, Jesus was actually proving that he cared for them more than they had ever realized. It's not that they didn't believe in him. It's like when Jesus goes to visit Lazarus, but he'd already died, right? He encounters, Mary comes out to meet him. He's like, Jesus, if only you'd been here, my brother would still be alive. Like, she believed Jesus had the power to heal the sick. She'd seen him do it. She believed it. But she did not believe Jesus had the power to raise the dead. Her faith had not been tested to that point yet. And so the disciples believed Jesus could stop the storm. That's why they woke him up. But in their panic, in their moment of doubt and being out of control, they did not believe that he could use the storm to test and reveal the measure of their faith. And it would actually be better for them to get to that point. A storm being calmed is great. It's a great feeling when you can start to see out of that fog bank, right? When God is finally delivering you from whatever metaphorical storm that you are experiencing. That blessing will come in due time, because storms can be terrible. They can be terrifying. They can even lead to our physical death sometimes. But it's the eternal death that ultimately matters. And if the storms that we are experiencing can reveal a level of faithlessness that we ultimately have, and that God can use that to restore our faith or give us that measure of faith, then that storm was worth it, even if it leads to our physical death. Now, that's hard. That's a sobering thing to think about. But if you're finding yourself questioning, when storms come up, you find yourself questioning and doubting in God's goodness and God's love for you and God's existence, then maybe that storm, maybe he is using that storm to simply reveal that level of faithlessness in you, to ultimately lead back to him, which is the third perspective, that storms can remind us of Jesus. Jesus calms the storm. He's like, do you still not have faith? And in the midst of this, the disciples went from being afraid of losing their lives to being terrified over this man who just calmed the wind and the waves and the storm with his voice. They were terrified. And again, it's not that they had a low view of this guy. They had left everything to follow him, called him teacher, called him master. But at this point, they're witnessing him not just heal the sick, but to have divine power over creation. And then on top of that, now this guy who's got divine power over creation is saying, why don't you believe in me? Why don't you love me? Why don't you trust in me? And they were terrified. A reverent fear and respect in God is healthy. And it's hard to maintain that in a life that we generally remain in control of and are generally safe and comfortable. But it's healthy to have a reverent respect and fear and awe of the God of the universe. So how can this fear become faith in him? How can the terror of his power become trust in him that actually provides freedom and safety for our not just physical bodies, but even more importantly, our souls? And it's not just by experiencing his power over storms. Like that can be a reminder of that. But when we begin to experience how he uses that power and authority over all of creation to save us, that's when it turns to faith. That he loves us. That's when it turns to trust. And it's interesting, as I close by giving a little gospel connection here, is that you look at this story in Mark 4 and some of the other gospels, and you compare it to the story of Jonah in the Old Testament. There are a lot of similarities here. You got both Jesus and Jonah were asleep on the boat in the midst of this terrifying storm, right? The descriptions of the storm in the two passages are very similar. In both stories, the sailors wake up, experience a storm. They think they're going to die. And in both stories, the sea was calmed by this divine intervention. And in both stories, the sailors had gone from being afraid of the storm and afraid of dying to being terrified at how the storm was calmed. Two identical stories, 800 years apart in time, with some minor differences. When Jonah woke up, he knew why the storm was there. He knew he was the reason the storm was there. He knew he was the guilty one for his sin and rebellion against God for getting on the boat to begin with. And he knew somebody had to pay the price for that storm, or else everybody was going to die. And so he told the sailors, hey, if you throw me overboard, you will survive this. You will live. Life is full of storms that come and go, and they leave varying degrees of destruction and devastation in their path. I mean, Western Carolina, Tennessee, still ravaged by the hurricanes, or the hurricane 2 months ago. But there is a storm of God's wrath that all of creation faces due to our sin and rebellion against him. And this storm has been raging ever since the Garden of Eden, has been raging ever since. And this is the ultimate storm that you and I will not and cannot survive on our own. And the death that it brings is not just a physical death, it is an eternal death of our soul. And Jesus, like Jonah, knew that the only way to calm the storm of God's wrath was to sacrifice. somebody had to be thrown overboard for the sea, or for the storm to be calmed. So Jesus, God's only Son, truly God's, truly man, who knew no sin, was willing to become sin for me, on my behalf, on your behalf. And he willingly, not in this story in Mark, but on the cross, he willingly threw himself into the sea of God's wrath, into this raging storm, to save me and to save you. And on the cross, he absorbed the fullness of God's wrath. And we can't really even fathom what that is. And here's the crazy thing. Just like his words on the boat in Mark 4 simply said, "Peace, be still," and the storm immediately calmed like a light switch. On the cross, Jesus' words, "It is finished," like a light switch, calmed the storm of God's wrath and rage and fury against my sin and rebellion against him. That's the good news of Jesus. This is Jesus, Christ, the Son of the living God, who remains patiently in absolute and sovereign control over all things. And no matter what the storms in your life look like, he loves you, he is with you, he is for you. And when it can be easy to panic in the midst of the storm, when it can be easy when we lose control to start doubting and questioning and being afraid, he has not abandoned you. He is not ignoring you. He loves you to this day. And maybe, just maybe, the storm that you're experiencing was allowed to come to reveal a level of faithlessness that you already had. And that is a measure of absolute love, to be able to reveal that to you so that you can look over and you can go cry out to Jesus to save you, because you cannot save yourself. And if you've never realized that you've never had faith before, maybe this is the moment that God is reminding you, I am here. I have done this. I love you. You are worthy. And he is waiting for you to cry out to him. Love you guys. Take care.